Okay, everyone, today we're going to cover solving polynomial equations. Might as well make that capital too. With factoring. Okay, so hopefully you went over the factoring like I warned you about many times, because it's come back. Okay, so probably the easiest problems you would look at will be the ones that are already factored. So let's say, for example, we have to solve, let's say 12x minus 4 times 6x minus 2 equals 0. Okay. Now when it's already factored, you just have to use the zero product property. Oh, thank you. To solve. And all that states is that if you have any number a times any number b and it equals 0, then that means either 1 equals 0 or both equal 0. So if you have a times b equals 0, then a equals 0, b equals 0, or both. Now in these cases, both probably won't equal 0 unless you have a squared function. So that just means you can make this one equal 0, this one equal 0, or if you have some value where both equal 0, that'll work too. Okay, so that means 12x minus 4 can equal 0, or 6x minus 2 can equal 0. Okay, so just draw a little line. So if we add 4 to both sides here, we have 12x equals 4. Divide both sides by 12. You have x equals 4 over 12. Or simplified, it's just 1/3. And for this one, if we add 2 to both sides, that cancels out, and just like that one. So you have 6x equals 2. Divide both sides by 6. You get x equals 2 over 6, which is also equal to 1/3. That doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen occasionally, where you get a repeated answer. So if it's just a repeated answer, you only have to write it once. So x equals 1/3 is the only answer. And we can go ahead and circle that. So slide that over. All right. Any questions on that one? All right. So let's say if we have. Well, I'll leave that up for a few more seconds. Make sure everybody got it. All right. Okay, so let's say, for example, if you have to solve, let's say 2w minus 7 squared equals 0. So 2w minus 7 squared is just 2w minus 7 times 2w minus 7. Equals 0. And again, using the zero product property, you just set both of them equal to 0, which you don't have to because they're the exact same, so you can only do it once. Well, if you wanted to. So that means 2w minus 7 equals 0, or just to go through the steps, which again, the writing it again isn't necessary if you don't want to. Okay, so if we add 7 to both sides, you have 2w equals 7, divide both sides by 2, w equals 7 over 2, and this one's same thing, w equals 7 over 2. Okay, so once again, if they repeat, you only have to worry about writing it once. All right, any questions on that one? Okay. Move that up a little bit. Okay, so let's say if we have the example, solve 4w times 10w minus 7 equals 0. Okay. So once again, as long as it's factored, you just set each factor equal to 0. Okay, so it's already factored. So set each to 0. Okay, so that means 4w can equal 0, or 10w minus 7 can equal 0. Either one would make it true. Okay, so for this one, if we divide both sides by 4, 0 divided by anything is just going to be 0. So you have w can equal 0. Or, here, if we add 7 to both sides, that cancels out. So you have 10w equals 7. Divide both sides by 10. You get w equals 10 over 7. Nope, 7 over 10, sorry about that. All right, any questions on that one? Okay. Okay, so now we're going to step into when they're not already factored for us, which is when we have to go back to all of the factoring rules that we had before. So anyone's still writing? All right, looks like everyone's done. Okay, so let's say, for example, if you want to solve a squared minus a minus 20 equals 0. Okay, now for this one, first thing you want to notice is there's no number in front of the a squared, or the lead coefficient, well, other than 1. But if it's a number, anything other than 1, then you have to use the a times c method, which we're going to do that too. Okay, so no coefficient other than 1. Okay, so that means all you have to do, find two numbers that multiply to equal your c, and those same two numbers add to equal your b. Okay, so for that one, it looks like -5 and 4 should work for both. -5 times 4 is 20, -20. And -5 plus 4 is -1. So that works. Okay. So that means this can now be factored into a minus 5, a plus 4. Equals 0. Okay. So now we have it factored out. We just do what we did before and set both to 0. So that means a minus 5 can equal 0, or a plus 4 can equal 0. So if we add 5 to both sides, you know that a can equal 5. Or if we subtract 4 from both sides here, a is equal to -4. All right, so any questions on that one? Yes?
So you would know your answer, a equals 5, 4, a equals -4?
On the homework, they may want you to write it, let's say they may have a equals and then have a little box or a line or something. Then you just have to put -4, 5. So that's probably how they would want it. All right, any other questions? All right. Leave that up for. Okay. Now, what if we had to solve 12x squared plus 28x equals -8. Bless you. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to always have it equal 0. Ooh, bless you. So make the equation, clean that up a little bit. Equals 0. Okay. We do that by adding 8 to both sides. Okay, so that would give us 12x squared plus 28x plus 8 equals 0. Okay. So here you have a value in front of the x squared, so you're going to have to use the a times c method. But before you start, because if you have 12 times 8 and then you want to find two numbers that multiply to equal that and two numbers that add to equal 28, it's going to get a little tricky. So you always want to see if you can factor first. So this one, you can actually factor 4 out of each one. Okay, so if we factor out a 4, 4 times 3x squared will give us 12x squared. So we put our 3x squared there. And 4 times 7x would give us 28x. And 4 times 2 will give us 8. So that would equal 0. Okay. And the reason why you want to be able to factor out that number, because now if you divide both sides by 4, that becomes 1, and 0 divided by anything is just 0, so now we just have to worry about 3x squared plus 7x plus 2 equals 0. Which is a lot easier to work with than that one. Excuse me. Okay. So now, since we have an a value here in front of the x squared, we use the a times c method. Okay. So a times c, we know that your a is equal to 3. Your b is equal to 7. And your c is equal to 2. So a times c is just 3 times 2, which is 6. So that means we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal your a times c. And those same two numbers have to add to equal your b. Yep, 6 and 1. So you have 6 times 1 is 6, and 6 plus 1 is 7. Oop, actually, let me write a times c method right there. Okay. So now, once we find those two values, we're going to replace our b. So move that up a little bit. There we go. So that gives us 3x squared. Instead of plus 7x, we're going to have plus 6x plus 1x. Plus 2 equals 0. Okay. And now we do the factor by grouping. And if you remember, that's when you take the 4 terms, you break them down to 2 smaller terms. And then you factor out a greatest common factor from both of them. Okay, so these two you can factor out of 3x, which will leave you with x plus 2. Now these two don't have anything in common but 1, so you can factor out a 1 there. And that would still leave you with x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, so now you have your matching binomial, which is the goal once you do factor by grouping. Okay, so you can factor out that matching binomial. So you have x plus 2, and go ahead and cross that out if you want to. And whatever's left goes in the next parentheses, so you have 3x plus 1 equals 0. All right. So now you have it all factored out. You can just go ahead and apply the zero product property. So that means, we should bring that up a little bit, that x plus 2 can equal 0, or 3x plus 1 can equal 0. Here, so if we subtract 2 from both sides, that gives us x equals negative 2. And here, if we subtract 1 from both sides, we'll move that up a little bit more. There we go. That gives us 3x equals negative 1. Divide both sides by 3. X equals negative 1/3. Okay, so those are your two solutions. All right. Any questions on that one? All right, I'll leave that up for a few more seconds. Let's see if I can bring that up just a hair. There we go. Oh, I'm still writing. All right. Okay, so let's say if we have the example, if we wanted to solve negative 6x to the third plus 10x squared minus 4x equals 0. Alright, so the first thing you want to do here is, because you have x's in every term and you can't do factoring if it's not in the ax squared plus bx plus c form, that x kind of throws that out, is you want to factor out your greatest common factor. Okay, so if you look at it, you can actually factor out a negative 2x from all of them. Okay, so if we factored out our negative 2x times 3x squared will give us 6x, negative 6x to the third. Okay, so negative 2x times negative 5x would give us positive 10x squared. And negative 2x times 2 would give us our negative 4x. Oh, clean that up just a little bit. Alright, and if you want to double check, you can always just distribute and see if you end up right back where you started. So, in case you were a little uneasy about your factoring. Okay, now the only difference between this one, oh yes.
So the way that's 6, did you distribute by 2 and 3?
For which part? Oh, you mean this one here?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, all I did was, well, one way you can kind of look at it is where you can have negative 6x squared, you can make that negative 2x times 3x squared plus negative 2x times negative 5x. Oops, should have given him a little more room. You could say minus, or I guess you could say plus negative 2x. Or minus 2x times, yeah, should have gave that more room. Give that a little more room there to avoid the cramming. There we go. That ought to do it. Okay, so you have negative 2x times 3x squared plus negative 2x times 5x, negative 5x. Negative 2x, I'm not supposed to say plus or minus, doesn't matter, times 2 equals 0, so we just factored out that negative 2x from each one. All right, does that make sense? Okay, so once we factor out our negative 2x, we just end up with what's left here. Okay, and now the only difference between this one and the last problem is we just factored out a number before, so we could just divide and get rid of the number. We can't divide now because we actually have a variable, so we can't just divide and get rid of the variable. So you have to solve for the variable. But it is factored out, so it's pretty easy because negative 2x squared equals 0 is just going to be 0, so that's pretty quick. Now, we just have to factor what's in here. Okay, and because you have something in front of the x squared, you have to use the a times c method again. So a equals 3, b equals negative 5, and c equals 2. All right, so we know our a times c equals 3 times 2, which again is equal to 6. Ooh, bless you. Okay, so that means we have to find two numbers. Nice, we'll move that up a little bit. that multiply to equal your 6. Uh-oh. And those same two numbers add to equal your b, which is -5. Okay. So for this one, it looks like -3 and -2 should work. Okay. So whenever you have a number up here that's positive that you're multiplying, but it's negative when you're adding, you know they're going to be two negative numbers. Or if it's negative up here and positive down there, you know one's going to be negative and one's going to be positive. Okay, so now we just replace -5x. Okay, so we have -2x times 3x squared, and instead of -5x, put -3x minus 2x plus 2, can't forget that one, equals 0. Okay. And now just for this part, we factor by grouping. Okay, so we have our -2x. And we can factor 3x out of both of those. And that leaves us with x minus 1. Here we can factor out a -2, which would leave us with an x minus 1. And again, if you're ever unsure, just distribute it back out. You can always double check it if it takes you right back to where you started. Okay, so we have our matching binomials, which is the goal whenever you're using the A times C method or factor by grouping. So you have -2x. You can factor out the x minus 1 and cross it out if you like. Oh, forgot my equals 0. And what's left goes into the other parentheses. Okay, so we have -2x times x minus 1 times 3x minus 2 equals 0. Again, once you have them all factored out, just set them all to 0. Okay, so you have -2x can equal 0, or x minus 1 can equal 0, or 3x minus 2 can equal 0. Okay. Here you divide both sides by -2. 0 divided by -2 is just 0. Okay. For this one, you add 1 to both sides. You end up with x equals 1. Put a little +1 there. And this one, if we add 2 to both sides, we end up with 3x equals 2. Divide both sides by 3. We have x equals 2 over 3. All right, so any questions on that one? Okay, leave that up for a few seconds. Everyone's still writing. Looks like everyone's done.